Back in 1975, 16-year-old Sharron Prior went missing right in her own town, and just a few days later, her body was found in a horrifying state. This case kicked off a long, painful fight for the truth that dragged on for almost half a century. The investigation went through countless leads, witnesses, and theories, but the real killer stayed a mystery until modern DNA technology finally came into play. This is a story about cruelty, a mother's relentless determination, and finally, the solving of a decades-old crime. Hey friends, welcome back to my channel, Detective Jaxon. Oh my god, today's story is definitely not for the faint of heart, seriously. I got chills down my spine a few times while putting this one together. So, if you're still ready to dive in, before we start, I'd love it if you could drop in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is there. Alright, let's get started. This story takes us all the way to Canada, a massive country with some of the most incredible nature you can imagine. From the snow-covered Rocky Mountains out west to the endless lakes and forests of Ontario and Quebec, Canada has it all. You can marvel at Niagara Falls, stroll the historic streets of Montreal and Quebec City, hit the slopes in British Columbia, or even go whale watching along the Atlantic coast. Canada is famous for its hospitality, clean cities, and rich cultural diversity. So no matter what kind of traveler you are, there's something here for you. Now, one of the most shocking and mysterious cases in Canadian criminal history stayed unsolved for almost half a century. A lot of people had already given up hope of ever learning the truth, but the victim's parents never stopped fighting for justice. And just recently, thanks to advances in forensic science and modern technology, this cursed case was finally solved. Sharron Prior was born in the winter of 1959 in picturesque Montreal. Her mum, originally from the United Kingdom, had moved to Canada with her family as a child and lived there her entire life. It was in Canada that fate brought her together with her future husband, George, who was serving in the Canadian Army. The young couple fell in love at first sight and soon got married. Not long after, their first child, Sharon, was born. Just a few days before Sharon's second birthday, her mum gave birth to twins, Doreen and Maureen. In 1962, George was transferred to Manitoba, and the whole family moved with him. Their new home was in one of the older neighbourhoods of the city, which, despite its age, was considered pretty safe and quiet. Sometime after moving, the couple welcomed another child, a son, George Jr. Sadly, not long after that, problems started to crop up in the family, and tensions in the relationship reached a breaking point. By 1965, the couple decided to divorce. George stayed in the army and was often away on assignments, while his ex-wife moved with the 4 kids into an apartment in Langley, which they got through a special military family support program. It was a quiet, cozy place, perfect for raising kids. Little did she know that even in such peaceful neighborhoods, true monsters could be hiding in plain sight. From a young age, Sharon was an incredibly kind, caring, and empathetic girl. She was always ready to help anyone in need, whether it was a person or a defenseless animal. She often took in stray cats and dogs from the streets, especially those who had suffered from cruelty or illness. She would care for them, nurse them back to health, and only then find them new homes. Sharon absolutely loved animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian one day. She was also really into sports and the arts. She joined a hockey club, took painting lessons, and even learned crafts. Everything about her hinted at a bright future filled with exciting opportunities and achievements. Her mum couldn't have been prouder of her eldest daughter, who was growing up independent, responsible, and wise beyond her years. Sharon always tried to stay away from bad crowds and trouble, but unfortunately, even that couldn't protect her from a fatal encounter with true evil. By 1975, life for the Prior family was moving along as usual. 16-year-old Sharon, like any teenager, was dealing with the normal ups and downs of her age. She loved trendy music and stylish clothes, which didn't always sit well with her parents. Around this time, she started dating a boy named John, who had had a crush on her since 4th grade. Finally, he won her heart, and they began dating. They spent a lot of time with friends and seemed like the perfect couple. Seeing their genuine feelings, her parents supported the relationship. According to Sharon's mom, she and her daughter never had serious arguments. Their relationship was always built on understanding and respect. Sharon was surrounded by good people, but even they couldn't protect her from the horrific tragedy that would shake her whole family. March 29th, 1975, started like any other day. Sharon woke up and had breakfast while her mum went to the store to pick up groceries and Easter gifts. When she got home, Sharon helped her mum unpack everything. This day was supposed to be special for the whole family. Sharon's mum was expecting some friends over, including her son, Stephen, and her boyfriend. Sharon spent most of the day colouring Easter eggs and getting ready for the holiday. Stephen showed up before the other guests and played with Sharon's younger brother. After school, Sharon and Stephen were supposed to stop by the local sports association, which offered not just sports but also arts and crafts. Sharon was excited to pick up a special jacket called the Leo, named after one of the organization's founders who had passed away from leukemia. This jacket wasn't just handed out, it was a symbol of membership in the association. To earn it, kids had to prove themselves, like selling raffle tickets or helping out with events. Sharon really wanted that jacket, and she had sold enough tickets to earn it. So she headed to the association full of pride and excitement, but when she got there, disappointment hit. The jacket in her size wasn't available. Feeling bummed, Sharon had to head back home empty-handed with Stephen by her side, but she didn't let it ruin her holiday mood and promised herself she'd pick it up another time. Back at home, she joined her mum and her mum's boyfriend Doug, helping finish the last-minute preparations. Once all the guests arrived, the family enjoyed a wonderful holiday dinner. Afterward, Sharon and her mum hid the painted eggs around the house so the younger kids could hunt for them later. Then Sharon asked if she could go to Marina's, a local pizza place popular with teens, just a short walk from home. Her mum had let her go there before with friends, so she didn't object this time either. Sharon went to her room to get ready. Around 6 o'clock, a neighbour girl stopped by the Prior house. She hung out with Sharon while she got ready, chatting and laughing together. Sharon borrowed her mum's sweater and put on her favourite suede jacket. By 6:30, the girls left the house, but Sharon ended up walking to Marina's alone. Her friend had changed her mind and decided not to go. They said goodbye, one heading home, the other to meet friends. At Marina's, a whole group of teens was waiting for Sharon, but for some reason, she never showed up at the appointed time. The teens assumed she just wanted to take a little walk with her boyfriend John and carried on with their hangout, totally unaware that something was wrong. Meanwhile, John and a few of his friends were at home watching a hockey game. After it ended, they decided to head to Marina's too, hoping to find Sharon there, but she never arrived. John was shocked. He hadn't seen his girlfriend since school and had no clue where she could be. Like everyone else, he assumed she'd show up at Marina's after the game. But her absence quickly raised alarm bells. This wasn't like Sharon at all. She was always punctual and responsible, and something felt very wrong. While Sharon was out, her mum put the younger kids to bed and spent the evening in front of the TV. But as the hours passed, worry started creeping in. Sharon should have been home a long time ago. Still, her mum tried not to panic, thinking maybe her daughter had just lost track of time hanging out with friends or with her boyfriend. She stayed in the living room, keeping an eye on the door and the window, waiting for Sharon to walk through. But the hours kept ticking by, and Sharon still hadn't returned. By around midnight, her mum couldn't hold back the fear any longer. There was still no sign of her daughter. It felt too late to call Sharon's friends, so all she could do was wait until morning, occasionally glancing out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. At first light, the worried mum started calling Sharon's friends, desperate to find out where she could be, but neither her friends nor her boyfriend John had any idea. Her worst fears were confirmed. Sharon never made it to the pizza place that night. The neighbour girl who had walked with Sharon confirmed that they had parted ways on the street, and she hadn't seen Sharon after that. A conversation with Sharon's best friend, Mary, made her anxiety spike even higher. Mary told her that after 7 o'clock that evening, there had been an attack near the pizza place on a 23-year-old woman named Cheryl Roy. An unknown man had rushed at her with a knife, but luckily, people passing by heard her screams. They scared the attacker off, and he ran in the direction Sharon would have been walking. Witnesses described him as a tall, dark-haired man with blue eyes and a mustache. He spoke in a calm, quiet voice and was wearing a ski jacket, blue jeans, and pointed-toe shoes. Hearing these details, Sharon's mum panicked. She realized that the time and place of the attack perfectly matched the route her daughter usually took. She immediately called the police, but the detectives didn't want to jump to conclusions. Instead of pointing fingers, they decided to launch a full-scale search right away. Hundreds of concerned citizens joined in to help look for Sharon. They were given a photo and description of the 16-year-old girl and combed through every corner, hoping to find her. Sharon's mum even appeared on local television, sharing the story with the public and begging anyone with information to contact the police and help bring her daughter home. Unfortunately, the search didn't turn up anything. Days went by, but there were no leads at all on Sharon's whereabouts. Still, her mum clung to hope, believing her daughter would come home safe and unharmed. The police tried to keep her spirits up, even though they knew the truth. After the critical 48 hours, the chances of finding a missing teen alive dropped sharply. Sharon had no reason to run away, no fights with her parents, no trouble at school. Her boyfriend John was a good guy, and their relationship was built on love and trust. He could never have hurt her. In fact, Sharon had no conflicts with anyone and stayed far away from bad company. That's why, at the start of the investigation, the police had no suspects and no solid leads. Efforts to track down the man with a knife who'd been seen in the neighbourhood came up empty too. The tense, suffocating silence dragged on, wearing down Sharon's mum, who still held on to hope for a miracle. Then, on the morning of April 1st, around 6 o'clock, Her mum woke up and looked out the window. What she saw made her instantly uneasy. A young man was leaving Sharon's friend's house, crossing the street, and grabbing a newspaper that had been left by their door. A bad, gut-wrenching feeling washed over her. She called out to him, trying to figure out why he was out so early and why he was taking someone else's paper. But instead of answering, he picked up his pace, clearly trying to disappear. Her mum ran outside and caught up with him. He tried to hold on to the newspaper, but she ripped it from his hands. The boy shouted, begging her not to look, but it was too late. On the front page was a photo of a girl's body, found in the snow, just a few minutes' drive from their suburban home. The shock didn't come from the awful news alone. She was also stunned that the police hadn't told her anything, even though they were supposed to. She had learned the truth later than everyone else. The neighbors had already read the morning papers. She tried to convince herself that the girl wasn't Sharon, just some student who looked like her. Summoning all her courage, she called the police to confirm, and the detectives told her they weren't yet certain of the identification and asked her to come in to take a look. But the horror was too much for her to face. She couldn't bring herself to go, so she asked her ex-husband to go instead. The entire neighborhood was in shock. The girl in the photo looked so much like the missing Sharon. Even more, the clothes she was wearing matched perfectly with the description her mum had given the police. Her father recognized his daughter immediately. There was no doubt Sharon, the 16-year-old high schooler, was dead. Her body had been discovered by a local resident who had read about Sharon's disappearance in the newspaper. When he saw her, he instantly realized it was Sharon. He immediately reported the horrifying discovery and added that someone had apparently broken onto his property. He always kept his doors locked, but on that Tuesday, he noticed the lock had been tampered with. There were no signs of forced entry, as if the intruder had opened it with a key, though only the homeowner had access. Stepping onto his driveway, he saw the female body, naked from the waist down. Strangely, nothing had been stolen from his house. Jack couldn't understand why someone would dump a body on his property. The police arrived quickly and launched a full murder investigation. They were immediately struck by the brutality of the crime. The body showed extensive signs of beating bruises, abrasions, and internal hemorrhaging. Sharon was left wearing only a suede jacket and a light blue sweater. The lower half of her body was completely exposed. Her jeans were found a few feet away, and her underwear was hanging on a nearby tree. Her mouth had been taped shut with duct tape, badly crumpled, strands of hair stuck to its sticky surface. Sharon's fingers were clutching at the tape, as if in her final moments she had been trying to tear it off and escape. The tracks in the snow showed she had struggled to get up, meaning the killer left her to die while she was still alive. The exhausted teen simply didn't have the strength to save herself. Investigators also found other physical evidence. About 50 feet from the body, there were faint tire tracks. A barely visible trail of blood led from the tire tracks to where Sharon's body lay. Since there were no drag marks, detectives suspected that more than one person might have been involved. Sharon's socks and shoes were clean. She hadn't crawled to the spot herself. Most likely, she had been carried from a vehicle and left to die in the open. Near the body lay a man's shirt. Her wrists showed clear marks from being bound, probably with that shirt. This detail suggested the main suspect was quite tall. At a nearby gatepost, the killer left another important clue, a clear shoe print. And there too, investigators found a receipt for the suede jacket Sharon had never gotten a chance to claim. The autopsy results revealed that Sharon had died just a few hours before she was found. It was clear she had been held captive from Saturday to Tuesday, subjected to both torture and sexual assault. There were telltale signs of strangulation on her neck. She had choked on her own blood. Medical examiners also found her ribs practically crushed, as if the killer had been kneeling or standing on her chest. On top of that, Sharon suffered severe traumatic brain injury and massive internal bleeding. Her body was covered in multiple stab wounds, and both sides of her jaw were broken. Her nose was smashed, and her cheek had been torn by a knocked-out tooth. Hundreds of people showed up at the local Presbyterian church to say goodbye to Sharon. Her mother could barely stand, paralyzed by grief so deep, it was almost physical. All she could think about in that moment was seeing her daughter's killer caught and punished as fast as possible. Just 3 blocks from where Sharon was brutally murdered, Canada had already experienced a similar crime against a minor. On July 9th, 1974, 12-year-old Norma O'Brien had been found dead. That evening, she had gone to the pool for water polo practice, only to discover it was closed for repairs. She turned back and never made it home. Her parents raised the alarm immediately that night, ruling out the possibility that she had run away. The search began instantly. The next day, Norma's mutilated, semi-naked body was found in a field not far from the pool. The parallels between Norma's and Sharon's murders were striking. Both girls had been partially undressed, brutally beaten, and strangled. Even more chilling, the attacks had occurred only about a half-hour drive apart. Investigators started to suspect the same maniac could be responsible, though they had no real leads. After Sharon's murder, on June 23rd, 1975, another girl went missing. 14-year-old Debbie Fisher. She was riding her red bicycle home and never arrived. The next day, her naked body was found in the woods. Unlike the previous victims, Debbie had not been sexually assaulted. Her death had been caused by a blunt force trauma to the head from a rock. Soon after, police arrested a 17-year-old boy, and he confessed to the crime. Because he was a minor, his name and photo were never released. The killer told investigators that on that day, around 6:30 in the evening, he was riding home in his moped after work. Suddenly, he saw Debbie pedaling along, holding a bottle of milk. He stared at her for a moment, and that's when the horrifying plan formed in his mind. He greeted her, and she responded back politely. Then the guy rode past her, shoved his moped into the bushes, and sat on the curb, pretending to cry. Debbie saw him and stopped. He called her over, and, trusting him, she walked closer. In that instant, the sicko grabbed her and started groping her. He yanked the milk bottle from her hands, threw it into the field, and then struck her on the head with a rock. Debbie lost consciousness. He hid her bike in the bushes and tried to assault her sexually, but failed. Furious at his own failure, he struck her with the rock again. That blow killed her. The killer then stuffed her body into an abandoned car in the woods and rode off on his moped. Later, Debbie Fisher's killer confessed to also murdering Norma O'Brien a year earlier, but he insisted he had nothing to do with Sharron Prior's death. At the time Sharon was killed, he had a verified alibi, so police didn't even consider him a suspect. In the end, he was convicted only for the other two murders. Since he was a minor, the sentence was relatively light, just a few years in prison. Today, that former teenage killer lives and works in Montreal. Back at the scene where Sharron Prior's body was found, police collected a huge amount of evidence that should have helped them catch the murderer. Detectives hoped they'd crack the case in just a few days, but reality proved far crueler. 13 months passed, and investigators still didn't have a main suspect to formally charge. Police interviewed 38 people who had crossed paths with Sharon that fateful evening. 6 were briefly detained because they matched the description of the suspect. Authorities were particularly interested in Frank Daly, the manager of the pizzeria Sharon had planned to visit. But in the end, everyone was released due to lack of evidence. Close friends of Sharon weren't overlooked either. Every single one had an alibi. Some were at the pizzeria, others watching a sports game at home. Gradually, the investigation hit a dead end. No new information came in, and all leads proved false. It seemed like the case had completely stalled. Everyone except Sharon's mother had given up hope. The mother couldn't accept her daughter's loss and kept searching for even the smallest detail that might shed light on what had happened. She realized that Sharon probably hadn't gotten far from home that evening. Around the same time the girl was walking to the pizzeria, a neighbor was coming home from work. For years, he had walked the same path every day, and that fatal day was no exception. But the man claimed he didn't see Sharon on the trail. Since she never made it to Marina, it seemed likely that someone intercepted her almost immediately after she parted ways with her friend. The attacker had a very narrow window of opportunity, yet he managed to seize it and abduct the schoolgirl without anyone noticing. Investigators never found a witness to the assault. It was as if the crime had been executed flawlessly. Sharon's desperate mother was convinced that someone on their street might have seen something, maybe a suspicious stranger, maybe even recognized the attacker if he lived nearby. Detectives suspected the killer was a fairly young man, probably still living with his parents. They believed he had serious psychological issues, twisted fantasies, and an intense anger or hatred toward women. Police assumed this attack wasn't his first, and if the maniac wasn't stopped, it wouldn't be the last. Investigators also considered the possibility that more than one person was involved in Sharon's kidnapping and torture. They looked to the man with the knife, who had attacked another girl, Cheryl, around the same time. That attempt had been interrupted by passers-by, forcing him to flee. Witnesses had provided a description of the suspect, but despite the police's efforts, he remained elusive. The odds that two separate predator kidnappers would strike simultaneously in one of the quietest neighborhoods were extremely low. Detectives therefore assumed the attack on Cheryl and Sharon's murder were committed by the same person. The killer's behavior suggested he knew the area very well. He moved without leaving traces, never arousing suspicion among local residents. Sharon's mother believed the murderer lived nearby. His nature, she felt, was sadistic. People with this type of psychopathy typically follow a predictable pattern. First, they appear attractive and friendly, luring their victim with trust. Once trapped, the sadist becomes increasingly cruel and demanding. It starts with control, then humiliation, then overt violence. Often, this is how their interactions with women escalate, but eventually, even this isn't enough. The predator begins hunting for new victims. Police decided to carefully check everyone in the neighborhood with a criminal record for harassment or domestic violence, but their primary focus was the mysterious man with a knife who attacked Cheryl. He fit the killer's profile perfectly. low social skills, a preference for cold weapons, repeated personal failures, and limited intelligence. This type of personality left its mark on Sharon's mangled body, a chilling signature of the predator who had taken her life. Judging by the severity of the beatings, the killer relied on brute force rather than persuasion or cunning. He clearly couldn't control himself. Quick to anger, he resorted to violence instantly. The most terrifying realization was that the police were likely dealing with a serial killer, someone who needed to be stopped as quickly as possible. At that time, the murderer was always one step ahead. Law enforcement did everything they could to track him, but many of the modern tools that make investigations more effective simply didn't exist yet. No DNA testing, no surveillance cameras, no phone, geolocation tracking. The detectives' hands were tied, their actions slow and often clumsy, and the killer used this gap to strike again. 6 years after the discovery of Sharon's mutilated body, the sadist claimed another victim. One 2-year-old schoolgirl, Tammy Leakey. It seemed the monster had shifted his focus to defenseless young girls, confident in his impunity after murdering one 6-year-old Sharon. The forensic experts who had examined Sharon's body were called to inspect Tammy's remains. They immediately noticed a striking similarity in the killer's methods, providing strong evidence that a single, calculating predator was responsible for both crimes. On the 20th of March 1981, Tammy Leakey went to visit her grandmother, just like the previous victim had years before. The girl disappeared just a few blocks from the home where she was staying. The elderly woman was feeling unwell and asked her granddaughter to go to the store, but Tammy never returned. The only clue along her route was a pair of glasses lying on the sidewalk, later noticed by Tammy's mother when she returned home. Frightened, the mother immediately reported her daughter missing to the police. Soon, a witness came forward who'd seen a man in a beige trench coat jump out of a small red car and forcibly drag the screaming girl into the vehicle. That same evening, Tammy was found nearly unconscious in an open area. The man who discovered her called the police station and reported the horrifying scene. The poor girl lay on the ground, naked from the waist down, covered only by her own clothing. Medical personnel desperately tried to save the child's life, but her injuries were fatal. She had been strangled. Although there were no visible signs of sexual assault on her body, traces of male semen were found on her clothing. As in the previous case, the attacker had acted shockingly recklessly, leaving behind numerous pieces of evidence. Yet none of them brought investigators any closer to solving these horrific crimes. Despite the detectives' persistent efforts, the investigation hit a dead end. At the same time, similar attacks on teenage girls and young children were occurring in neighbouring regions of Canada. In 1978, for instance, the body of one 7-year-old Liza Blah was found dead in Montreal, just a few meters from her own home. Early in the morning, she had been returning from a disco when someone struck her violently on the head, raped her, and murdered her. The perpetrators of this crime were never found. There were so many similar cases that the police struggled to determine whether they were connected. In 2000, Sharon's mother once again approached the police. She insisted that all the materials in her daughter's case be re-examined. Over the 25 years that had passed, science and technology had made tremendous leaps forward. Forensic experts now had access to more precise and effective tools, including DNA analysis. But the answer the grieving woman received in the mail a week later shocked her to the core. Most of the physical evidence collected in the year of Sharon's death had mysteriously disappeared back in 1995. Among the few items that remained were only the girl's clothing, and the clothing supposedly belonging to the suspect. Forensic experts carefully examined the men's shirt found at the crime scene. They were able to isolate a DNA sample that did not belong to the victim. However, even after checking against the genetic database, no matches were found. The biological material was meticulously preserved for future comparison with samples from potential suspects. Later, this very sample would become key to solving the gruesome case. In June 2004, police received information about a garage where the killer might have held Sharon captive. Detectives immediately went to the location, but despite a thorough search, they could not find any physical evidence linking the property to the crime. The authorities collected 3 DNA samples, yet none of them matched either the genetic material of the deceased girl or the biological traces on her clothing. Ultimately, this lead was deemed promising but ultimately fruitless. The next unexpected development in this high-profile case came in 2012. An anonymous benefactor publicly announced a substantial cash reward up to $10,000 for any information that could help catch the brutal killer who had taken the lives of 2 young girls. This development indicated that the investigation had made some progress and that the police had received new leads. For the convenience of citizens who wished to share tips or information with the authorities, a special telephone hotline was established. However, as had happened dozens of times before, no breakthrough was achieved. investigators once again turned their attention to the unresolved episode involving the attack on Cheryl, hoping finally to identify the perpetrator. The young woman, who had fought off the knife-wielding attacker and had managed to get a good look at his face, agreed to undergo a hypnotic session in an altered state of consciousness. During this session, she was shown photographs of various men, including the notorious serial killer William Patrick F. It was Patrick whom the witness identified as bearing a strong resemblance to her attacker. Patrick was a Canadian maniac whose guilt in the deaths of 5 women in Montreal had been proven in court, although he claimed to have had at least 9 victims. The remaining bodies were never found. Detectives had long suspected that F might be connected to the murders of young girls and tried in every possible way to link him to these horrific crimes. However, the experienced killer persistently denied any wrongdoing, claiming that he did not take a life before 1979. It should be remembered that Sharon had been brutally murdered in 1975. The charges against Patrick in this matter remain purely speculative. Subsequently, law enforcement attempted to link the deaths of the schoolgirls to other dangerous Canadian criminals. Mike French, a member of the infamous Montreal motorcycle club Satans, came under suspicion. In 1975, at the time of Sharon's bloody murder, French lived in the same neighborhood, and 2 years later he moved with his parents to another city. Acquaintances described French as an extremely aggressive and cruel person, fully capable of killing a child. There were even several witnesses who allegedly heard him boast about his involvement in Sharon's brutal murder. But here again, fate turned against the authorities. In November 1982, during a bloody confrontation between rival gangs, French was shot dead. He took all the secrets regarding his possible involvement in the attacks on the girls to the grave. Notably, the police never even fully clarified the circumstances of French's death. All these theories remained purely speculative, with no substantial evidence to support them. The devastated Prior family was deeply frustrated by the incompetence of the investigators, who had failed to identify the real killer. Sharon's relatives swore to see justice done for the scoundrel who had tormented their child while alive. For Sharon's mother, this exhausting struggle was not only a matter of family honor, but also a moral obligation to all parents whose children had been destroyed by perverts. In 2019, the desperate mother participated in a television program alongside 9 other families who had experienced similar tragedies. They publicly accused law enforcement of incompetence and negligence. Police representatives refused to appear in the studio during the interviews. The long-awaited breakthrough in this high-profile case came only in June 2022. Thanks to advancements in genetic genealogy, experts were able to find a DNA profile in a database that matched the sample taken from a man's shirt at Sharon's murder scene. The most likely owner of the genetic material turned out to be Franklin Romaine, who had died under mysterious circumstances back in 1982. His remains had to be exhumed in order to conduct all the necessary analyses. On the 23rd of May 2023, the connection between the biological traces at the crime scene and Franklin's DNA was officially confirmed. Romaine's appearance perfectly matched the descriptions of the suspect provided by witnesses. He had lived in the area where the abduction took place, and his car matched the tire tracks found near the body of the unfortunate Sharon. Franklin had a dark criminal past, including prior convictions for assault and rape. All these facts finally allowed investigators to connect the dots in this chilling story. Of course, no one went to trial, but at least the authorities were able to officially close the case and inform the victims' relatives who had committed this horrific crime. The murder of the 6-year-old schoolgirl was solved thanks to modern DNA analysis methods and the persistence of her loved ones, who tirelessly sought the truth for nearly half a century. This concludes today's episode. We invite you to share your thoughts on this extraordinary story in the comments. Thank you for watching, take care, and see you next time on our channel.